Hello all, and thank you for joining us for today's ADA Talks. Today, we will be talking about accessible voting. Just before we start, I'd like to start us off with some webinar etiquette. Attendees will be muted during this webinar. You can use the chat feature in Zoom to post questions and communicate with the host. This webinar is being recorded and broadcasted on Facebook. We will post an archive of the webinar on our YouTube channel. The link will be shared via email along with the slide deck and a resource page. To view the slide deck and panelists side by side, please refer to the control panel at the bottom of your screen. The More option will bring up a drop list of settings. Click on side by side mode to see the speakers and slides simultaneously. Today's speakers are Carla Waring, Shari Veleba, Brett Harbage, Nate Fernandes, Maggie Scotece, and Jen Miller. And I now turn you over to Carla Waring.
Hello and welcome to Center for Disability Empowerment ADA Talks 2020. This is a series of webinars that we put together in honor of the ADA 30th anniversary, which was in July of this year. We are dedicating 2 of our webinars to accessible voting. Today's webinar is part 1, and we'll have a part 2 on Tuesday, September 22nd. We also, in honor of Disability Employment Awareness Month, in October, we're going to have our focus to be on employment. November 24th, we'll be focusing on ADA and service animals, and December 15th will be higher education and transitioning to higher ed. We hope you can all join us for those webinars. The Center for Disability Empowerment is one of 12 centers around the state of Ohio. We provide 5 core services: information and referral, advocacy, independent living skills, peer support, and transition services. We also serve 4 counties in Ohio, which is Franklin, Delaware, Licking, and Union County. We have a special project called Access Ohio. This is a project that I currently work with, and we offer training and transition plan consultation and technical assistance throughout the state of Ohio on Americans with Disabilities Act. So if you have any questions on the ADA, feel free to contact myself or Rich Wagner, and we can answer your questions. The ADA was passed by Congress and signed into law 30 years ago, on July 26, 1990. On this slide, you will see a picture of President Bush signing the ADA, and beside him are activists and advocates that helped pass the ADA. And one of those persons sitting to the left of the President Bush is Justin Dart. The ADA is a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life, including jobs, schools, transportation, and voting. Next slide. So here's a picture of Justin Dart, and he is regarded as the godfather of the ADA and co-founded the American Association of People with Disabilities. He was in the previous picture with President Bush, and in this picture is him giving a speech and one of his quotes: "Vote as if your life depends on it, because it does." In a little over 70 days, we will have an opportunity to vote in one of the most important elections of our times. Voting is one of the greatest rights and responsibilities that any person has in our democracy. It is important to ensure people can vote for candidates and initiatives of their choice so that their voice and interests are represented. The right to vote is something that many groups had to fight for and are still working to ensure those rights. This includes people with disabilities. In the last presidential election in 2016, 250 million people were eligible to vote. That is 18 years or older. Of that, only 55% people did vote. In the election in 2018, 14.3 million people with disability voted. Ohio is home of 1.5 million people with disabilities. At CDE, we want to encourage and increase the number of Ohioans with disability to vote. That is why we are dedicating 2 webinars on accessible voting. Next slide. So today's presentation, we have a lineup of some dedicated and wonderful speakers that would be talking about why is it important to vote, how and when and where to vote, and your voting rights and resources. We've also have built in some extra time for questions and answers. So please enjoy today's presentation. We hope you find it very informative, and remember to vote November 3rd. I'm going to turn to Shari, who will be taking us away with the next part of our presentation.
Thank you very much, Carla. And the question is, why should people with disabilities vote? Because as she said, as Carla said, it is our right and our responsibility. Here's a couple of statistics, though, to let you know why it's important. Throughout the years going back, people with disabilities were very sluggish with voting participation. In recent years, however, and going back to the 2018 midterm election, voter turnout amongst people with disabilities surged by 8.5%. That amounted to, I think Carla said, about 14.3 million citizens with disabilities voted that year. That reversed the trend of declining and stagnant voter turnout in previous years. And I'm going back, there's a gentleman that used to be with the American Association of People with Disabilities. His name was Jim Dixon. He would always say that the population of people with disabilities is the sleeping giant of American politics. And back in those days when we weren't voting in larger numbers, we were very much sleeping. But with the 2018 midterm results where more people with disabilities voted, I would have to say that the sleeping giant of American politics, or people with disabilities, is waking up. And so that's why I would challenge everyone with a disability to not be left behind, to join with your friends and your family and your neighbors with disabilities and register and cast your ballot to vote, because that, your vote, is your voice, and it's a very important voice. Let's see, there's another note. It's through Rutgers University did some studies, and they said if people with disabilities voted at the same rate as people without disabilities, there would be about 2.35 million more voters in the voting pool. That's interesting. And then we come down to common interests. Think of voters with disabilities also have family members who they could encourage to vote and have a connection to the same types of topics, disability issues. And then the studies have also shown that when a person with a disability is employed, they are much more likely to vote. And that is because the person with a disability who has a job has a bigger stake in what happens in their lives. They feel more connected to their community, and they are more apt to think that my vote really matters. And then coming down to, as we age, It's again important for people with disabilities to be connected to voting because as we age, studies show that an estimated 30 to 35% of all voters within the next 25 years will need some form of accommodation to be able to vote. So with that, I conclude my notes and lead to our next speaker. Thank you.
Okay. So I believe we are next.
Yes.
All right. I'm Nate Fernandes, and I'm here with Brett Harbage, who is the ADA coordinator for the Ohio Secretary of State's office. I am the digital accessibility coordinator. So what we're going to do is talk about, Shari just did a wonderful job at talking about the why we vote. And there were some fabulous statistics there, by the way. The next thing we're going to do is talk about the how. And so I will actually begin with the first thing, and that's, first of all, let's get registered. You can you can register to vote online at voteohio.gov. That's voteohio.gov. In order to do that there, you will need the following items. Your Ohio driver's license or state ID number. It's usually found on your card. Your name, of course, date of birth, address, and the last 4 digits of your social security number. If you do not have any, some or any of those available, there is a paper form available at voteohio.gov as well. And you can, of course, call our office or your county board of elections to get that form as well. So those are just a couple of options for you that way. Forms are also available at local libraries and other voting offices. So the deadline for this election, for the November 3rd election, to register to vote or to change your address is October 5th at 9 p.m. And don't panic. We're going to be giving a lot of dates throughout the next few slides, but we have all of those dates on our final slide. So don't panic if you forget what dates everything is. You can also, of course, go to our website, voteohio.gov, to find out when things need to be done by. With that, I'll turn it over to Brett, who will briefly talk about options for voting, and then I will get into the specifics of the mailing in and accessible voting process. So, Brett?
All right. Thanks, Nathan. I appreciate it. Again, my name is Brett Harbage. I'm the ADA coordinator for the Ohio Secretary of State's office. One of the great things about the state of Ohio is voters have a few different options when it comes to casting their ballot. We really pride ourselves on making sure that all 3 options for voting are accessible to people with disabilities. So in Ohio, you have your first option is absentee voting by mail. You also have an option to do early in-person absentee voting, and then there's what I call the traditional method of voting, and that's on election day at your polling place, your local precincts in your polling locations in your communities. So Nathan's going to first talk about absentee voting by mail, and then I'll talk to you a little bit more about in-person absentee voting and election day voting.
Okay. So I'm going to start, there are 2 sort of subsections to this. So I'm going to start with what I call the traditional mail-in ballot. So your request must be made in writing. There are multiple ways of doing that. There are forms on our website if you want a more formal voter request form for a regular absentee ballot. The other thing that you can do is make sure you have the appropriate info on a piece of paper. So the deadline for this is Halloween at noon. I enjoy saying that instead of the actual date. However, we are highly, highly, highly recommending that you do this as soon as possible and no later than October 27th. Again, I need to clarify that is not a statutory deadline. However, realistically, if you want to get your ballot in the mail in time to cast it, you definitely want to get that done as soon as possible. All registered voters will actually be getting an absentee ballot request form in the mail. We're sending out, I believe, something over 7 million of these. This is not a ballot. This is the form to request your ballot. And you should be receiving that in early September, probably just a bit after Labor Day. So after the ballots will be sent out on October 6th. After you've requested one, you will get your ballot, you will fill out the circles, you will mark your choices. One thing that we love telling people about, voting from home, regardless of how you do it, is that you can actually do research. I know that people will open their laptops or their phones and look up candidates and do all kinds of things and actually be able to sit with their ballot. I'm somebody with a disability, and I recognize that going to a polling place or going to some place with an early absentee voting, especially with everything going on with COVID right now, there's kind of pressure to get in there, know what you're doing, and get out. And I understand that can be very anxious, that can produce some anxiety for people. So we just want to make sure, so voting by home, at home is definitely an option. And that's a great way to do it. Your ballot, after you're done filling it out, along with the accompanying paperwork, must be postmarked by Monday, November 2nd, or you can drop it off at your Board of Elections, not your polling place, not your neighborhood polling place. The Board of Elections in your county, there is a safe, secure drop box there, and those have to be dropped off. And they have to be dropped off by 7:30 p.m. on November 3rd. Again, that's at your county Board of Elections. Now, if you want to take the accessible voting system route, this is still a vote by mail process. So what you will need is a printer and an email address for this process, or access to a printer. You will apply using a special form called Form 11G, as in go vote, and you can complete that using a form on our website at voteohio.gov. You will fill out the information. The one difference between this and a traditional absentee form is that it will require you to state that you're somebody with a qualifying disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and you require the use of this tool to vote. I want to be very clear. You do not need to specify the disability that you have, and you cannot be asked about it by your county board. So don't worry, don't feel like you have to disclose what your disability is. That's absolutely not what you have to do. When you're done, you print out this form, you sign it, and then you mail this into your county Board of Elections. Again, this all goes through your county Board of Elections. After you get this in, they will send you an email with a link or a file with your ballot, and it will look like you're sort of using, if you've ever used something like a SurveyMonkey sort of tool, it will look kind of like that. There'll be buttons and there'll be boxes for you to check. What will happen is you will fill out your ballots using any device that you like. So if you have an iPhone, great. And you're using VoiceOver, wonderful. If you're somebody using Zoom text on a computer, if you're somebody using a device on your head to mark, Those are all meant to be used with this sort of device. So just so you know, these are all accessible with those kind of devices. Anything that basically resembles a keyboard, that's meant to work with this. After you fill out your ballot, you print out your sheet. You print out and fill out a couple of small forms to send back. You mail that ballot back into your county board. Again, deadline is November 2nd to postmark it, and then your options for November 3rd are to drop it off at your county board by 7:30 p.m. So that's an overview of how the accessible voting system works. And I will turn it back over to Brett, who will talk about in-person voting, both what we call absentee early in-person voting and election day voting.
All right, great, Nate. Thank you. So then your next opportunity to cast a ballot is, to early in-person absentee voting. And what that allows a voter to do is to go down to your county board of elections office or to the county early voting center. There are a few counties who have a designated alternative building or designated space that's considered their early voting center. But beginning on October 6th, so the day after registration closes, you can go down to your county board of elections and vote early. Early in-person absentee voting ends on November 2nd at 2 p.m. One of the great things about early in-person absentee voting is you have so many days and so many different hours that you can go down to the board of elections and cast your ballot. So if you're going to be out of town on election day, maybe you have to work, or you're just not able to get transportation on election day to your polling location, this gives you an opportunity to go down to your board of elections and vote early. Again, there are uniformed hours at each early voting location. The other nice thing is, as I mentioned, there's evening hours and there's also weekend hours the last 2 weeks. You can go to our website at the link there and look up the hours and schedule for early voting. But again, it just gives you more opportunity, more hours to go down to your county board of elections and vote early in person. So if we go on to the next slide, we're looking, this is more your traditional, your third option of voting, and that's voting on election day. November 3rd is election day coming up here. The plan is, and we're moving forward with having a normal election day. You will notice some things that'll be a little bit different. We're looking at a lot of COVID-19 health and safety precautions. There may be some signage, telling you where to stand, doing the 6-foot social distancing. But the plan is to move forward with having a normal election day where you can go down to your local precinct between 6:30 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. And cast your ballot. Keep in mind that you must vote at your designated polling location. You can, and that's based on your permanent address that you're registered at. There'll be a designated location. Maybe it's the local church, local school, it could be a township house in your neighborhood. But you can go to our website, voteohio.gov, or you can go to your local county board of elections website and type in your address, and it'll tell you exactly where your polling location is located. That way you can get down there and vote on election day. So having said that, again, so you got 3 different options when it comes to casting your ballot. You can vote by mail, you can vote early in person at your board of elections, and then you can also vote on election day at your polling location. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Nate. He's going to talk a little bit about some important dates and deadlines that are coming up for this November 2020 election. Nathan?
Fantastic. Thank you, Brett. Again, we were asked to really hammer home key dates. So that's why, and again, we wanted to have them for you all in one place. So starting with October 5th, the last day to register to vote or change your address for this election. Again, that's a 9 p.m. deadline. October 6th, absentee voting begins. And again, that's when you will begin to receive your ballot if you've requested one for voting at home, whether that be through the traditional means or through using the accessible voting system. October 31st at noon is your deadline to request an absentee ballot. Again, the thing that I would stress is if you can do it now, do it. I know that county boards have already reported they've received a lot of absentee requests. So the faster you can get on this, the better. November 2nd is the Monday before the election, and that is your final chance to postmark your absentee ballot. You will make sure that that's done. November 3rd, of course, is election day. And what I will say is that polls will be open from 6:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. in your local community. Go to voteohio.gov to find out where those are. Also, if you were not able to postmark your absentee ballot by that date, you will need to drop that off to your county Board of Elections on November 3rd. Again, you have until 7:30 p.m. to do that. One final thing I want to say, and then I will be done, is that don't be surprised if you don't see full election results that night. We won't get into all the details, but we'll just say that because of the sheer volume of mail-in ballots, we may not know a winner that night. So if you go to bed that night and you don't know a winner, don't panic. It's okay. There's probably nothing wrong. So with that, I believe we are done with our portion, and we will turn it over to the next speaker, and we look forward to any questions you may have. Thank you.
Great. Great. Thank you, Nate and Brett. Now we'll hear from the League of Women Voters, Jen Miller.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here with you. The League of Women Voters started in 1920 in Ohio and across the country. We were formerly the Ohio Women's Suffrage Association, and we became the League in 1920 when we knew that women were going to get the right to vote. Our job is to serve all voters, no matter where they live in Ohio, no matter how they want to vote. There's all three of those ways: absentee, early in person, or in person at your neighborhood polling location. Our job is to support all voters regardless of their party affiliation. So on the screen, we just have some pictures of League activities. In the front corner is smiling faces. That's my team of staff and interns. To the right is a picture of women and a few men who are participating in our State House Day, learning about things. Bottom left is a Get Out the Vote March, where again, we're not talking about candidates, we're just trying to encourage people. We also have a picture of young ladies who dressed up as famous suffragists and gave suffrage speeches for us. And then women lobbying the halls of Congress for laws. I just really quickly just wanted to remind all of us that when our nation was founded, only white men who owned property, who were able-bodied, were able to vote. It has been a long effort. We are now at the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment that extended the franchise to women. But ultimately, not all people had the right to vote. All eligible citizens truly had the right to vote until the passage of the Voting Rights Act. that really stopped racial discrimination, especially in the South, but all over in the 1960s. And then these really key laws, and even court cases, even one that the League brought after the 2004 election in Ohio, but a lot of laws that extended and assured the rights of people with disabilities for voting. And I mention that because I want us to remember that voting is sacred and it's hard fought. And so your vote is powerful, and please don't take it for granted. Next slide, please. I just want to remind everyone who can vote. If you're 18, by November 3rd, you can vote. So even if you want to vote early and you're not 18 yet, you just make sure you register and you can still vote early. The point is you have to be 18 by the official election day, the final day of voting, November 3rd. You need to be a US citizen who's lived in Ohio for at least 30 days. Of course, you need to be registered, and we talked about that, and I think we will continue. You can't be serving time for a felony. One thing is people often think that one of the biggest misconceptions I see is that people think that if they have a criminal record that they cannot vote. That's not true. The only time that's true is if you are currently in prison serving time for a felony. Also, finally, and I'm seeing this question a lot for voters with developmental disabilities or perhaps with dementia, everyone can vote unless they were found incompetent by a court. So sometimes we will hear about our friends with developmental disabilities or who are questioned at the polls. Usually that doesn't happen because poll workers are awesome, but occasionally someone, a member of the public will ask, and you are allowed to vote. People with developmental disabilities, people with dementia are allowed to vote unless they are found incompetent. You absolutely, now and we can talk about that still, where yes, people can have guardians, but still be considered able to vote. Let's go to the next slide. So my biggest takeaway for all of you is to make your election plan. The cool thing about Ohio is we have multiple ways to vote. That also can make it a little bit confusing. And so the first thing you want to make sure you do is make sure your registration is up to date. So even if you voted recently, make sure that everything is right on there, and you can check that, and I think we will share that again, but you can check your registration on the Secretary of State site, on your County Board of Elections site, or actually on my website, that's also the candidates guide at vote411.org. Then you need to decide how you're going to vote. Are you going to go absentee, which is when we're talking about voting by the comfort of your kitchen table, and you're either putting that in the mail or in a drop box? Are you going to go early in person for 28 days, which is a great option if you want to go in person? There's one location per county. And the fun thing about that is that if you wanted to go with others in your family, and maybe you live in different places, you can all vote at the same location. That's what my daughter and I do. And then we go out to eat afterwards. Super fun. Or you can vote in person on election day, but just make sure you check your polling location. Part of your election plan, though, is to, once you know which way you want to vote, is to make sure you have everything you need. You know the key dates, you know what kind of identification you need. If you're going in person, that you have that transportation set up. Finally, we want you to research your candidates and issues, and vote411.org is a very fair site. It's the candidates put their own information in, and it should be accessible. It has been tested for accessibility, but if you have challenges, you can let me know or call the League office, and we will make sure we fix that. Let's go to the next slide. So again, just decide how you want to vote. And I talked about the steps again, but we've already talked about them, so I'm not going to go any further on that one. And that might be, let's see if I have any more slides. I can't remember. Is there any others? So here is how you research the candidates and issues. We just have a picture of a little notepad saying you can take notes. But if you go to vote411.org, you can actually compare two candidates on various issues. You can also check out your candidates in the local news. If you want to know more about judicial races, which is really critical, or what judges and courts do, there's a website that is a partnership with the League and the University of Akron and the Ohio Supreme Court called Judicial Votes Count. And all of those can help you. I did see that there was some questions, very good questions, about people in facilities. So maybe senior centers or you know, group homes, those kinds of things. In the past, the League would go to these places all over the state with registration forms and with absentee ballot requests. But because of COVID, you may not be able to get into those places. So one way that you can serve those various facilities and communities in your area is you could actually just call them and see if they have enough registration forms and absentee request forms. If they don't, you could offer to drop those off, and you can pick them up once they're filled out. The one thing you cannot do is you cannot drop off ballots for someone. But again, you can, that's one great way. Check on those facilities. Our boards of elections are so busy this year that even if all you're doing is picking up forms or printing them out yourself for registration and absentee requests and getting them to different places, I think that's really helpful. Next slide. And I just wanted to remind everyone who can help you vote. You can, if you are voting in person for early voting, or you're voting in person on election day, you can ask a guardian, a friend, a family member, or a poll worker. You just can't ask an employer, agent of your employer, someone from your union, if you if you're a union worker, or a candidate on the ballot. So Ohio law says you can't ask those folks. Otherwise, you can ask anyone. You can ask them to help you read. You can ask them to just sit there with you, whatever you need. Now, in terms of turning in your absentee ballot, the only people that can drop off your absentee ballot are immediate family members. And there is a conversation in the chat about who those are from Brett, which is super helpful. And I think the one thing I will tell you is they can help you by reading. Folks can help you by getting in and out of a facility perhaps, or if you want to do curbside voting on election day, where, you know, someone runs in and asks for help for you, but they can't tell you how to vote. That's not their job, just to help you with all the tactical aspects of voting. And I think my time is done. So here's some, if you have voting questions, you can call my office. You can call Disability Rights Ohio. You're going to hear from my good friend Maggie soon. The Nonpartisan Election Protection Hotline, 866-OUR-VOTE, OUR-VOTE, or the Secretary of State's site. And the picture there is a handsome young man making a call. And finally, just want to thank you so much. That is my personal email, and to the side is a picture of smiling voters. Thank you.
Great, great. Thank you for that wonderful information. We have a lot of questions in the chat, and we will be getting to those questions during our question and answer period that we'll be following our next speaker from Disability Rights Ohio, Maggie Scotece.
Hey everyone, my name is Maggie. I am a staff attorney with Disability Rights Ohio. And actually on the next slide, if we can go to that, you'll see my contact information. This is both the contact information for disability rights generally, but also my specific contact information is listed there as well. Next slide. So if you don't know who Disability Rights of Ohio is, we are a nonprofit organization. We are a federally designated nonprofit that actually handles advocating for the human, civil, and legal rights of people with disabilities in the state of Ohio. We are federally funded, and we are also Ohio's only protection and advocacy organization. which means we have the ability to access people with disabilities in places where we otherwise might not be able to access them, such as prisons or closed facilities, as well as the Client Assistance Program organization for the state of Ohio, which means we help people who have developmental disabilities who need retraining or access to services. We are governed by a board of directors, and we are largely staffed by people with disabilities and family members of people with disabilities. Next slide. So some of these resources we've talked about a little bit today. I'm going to go over them as well again. A really great place to start when you're talking about voting access is the Secretary of State's office, specifically their voting hub, as well as Voting in Ohio. These are really great resources. They have most of the information that I'm gonna be covering, as well as access points if you have any questions. Next slide. One of my favorite things on the Secretary of State's website is the Ohio Voter Toolkit. It has all of these different options for ways that you can access voting information, such as checking your registration online, actually tracking your ballot. If you've requested an absentee ballot, you can see whether or not your request has been received yet, when your ballot has been sent, and when you can expect to get it. You can view a sample ballot online, as well as find your polling location. Next slide. Another really great resource, and this is kind of one of the things I want to make sure that I am conveying as much as possible, is the options that DRO has in terms of being a resource for voters with disabilities or family members of voters with disabilities. We have lots of information on our website, our Voting Rights FAQ, as well as our Voting Rights publication that are available on our Self-Advocacy Resource Center. Which are really, they have lots of answers about different questions that people with disabilities, specifically developmental disabilities, might have if they're exercising their right to vote. Next slide. You can also check your voter registration online. I know Brett and Nate talked about this a little bit. You can check it online as well as update it online. And again, the deadline to do that is October 5th of this year. This has been talked about in the chat a little bit already, but there is also the online directory for the county boards of elections. If you have questions about getting a reasonable accommodation at your polling facility, if you have questions about what curbside voting looks like at your specific polling location, if you have questions about needing an accommodation to have somebody else drop off your ballot, your board of elections is going to be the place you want to start to be asking those questions. And if you are having a problem negotiating with the board of elections to understand how to get the reasonable accommodation you need, I would encourage you to contact Disability Rights Ohio. We have a long history of working with boards of elections to make sure that voters with disabilities can get the reasonable accommodations that they need. Additionally, I've also linked here the online sign up for poll workers from the Secretary of State's website. Next. We talked about this several times already in this presentation, but absentee voting is going to be one of the biggest options for voting this year. There is an absentee ballot request form online that you can fill out. If you have questions or concerns about making absentee voting accessible for you, given your specific disability, again, Disability Rights Ohio is going to be a great option in terms of figuring out what your options are and how to get whatever reasonable accommodation you need. Next slide. So here's one of the big things that Disability Rights Ohio does. We have a hotline on election day for the entire election voting hours from 6:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. That elections hotline is staffed by our staff, but also by attorneys who have helped voters navigate the processes of accessing elections for several years. One of the things we do on that hotline is help people who are in what we call special circumstances voting situations. So that might be somebody who is confined to a long-term facility, whether that be a nursing home or a psychiatric ward. People who are unexpectedly hospitalized, either themselves or their minor child on election day, whether that is in county or out of county. People who need access to remote ballot marking tools, or people who are confined to their home for disability reasons and need access to voting unexpectedly. I have linked all of the forms for these situations here on this slide. However, if you are in a situation that is a special voting circumstance, I would highly suggest you contact Disability Rights Ohio so that we can help you navigate the process. A lot of these situations are going to happen between that deadline of October 31st to request your absentee ballot and November 3rd. on the actual day of voting. If you were unexpectedly hospitalized during that time period, you still can exercise your right to vote, but you would need to contact Disability Rights Ohio so we can help you navigate that process. Next slide. This has already been talked about a little bit already, the voting schedule, and I have linked to the Secretary of State's office for the voting schedule online. One thing to note, however, is that October 31st deadline for absentee ballot applications is not necessarily finalized. There is legislation currently pending at the State House that could change that deadline and make it sooner rather than later. So I would encourage you, much as everybody else on this webinar has been doing, to fill out those online applications as quickly as possible and get them turned in. Next slide. So if you have an issue with a voting rights violation on the day of election, I would say your first option is going to probably be to call any of the organizations that Jen listed, specifically Disability Rights Ohio. If you're trying to access something and you're having a problem crop up, we can help either talk you through that situation or work with the Board of Elections or the poll workers to help get that situation resolved as quickly as possible. However, you do also have the opportunity to file complaints both with the Department of Justice voting section as well as the Election Protection Organization that Jen referenced earlier. Next slide. So I've mentioned this a little bit already, but we have this voter hotline that runs every election day, yes, even primaries, and is staffed during the entirety of election hours that allows people to call in and get real-time assistance in accessing that election. So if you are somebody who has a developmental disability or has a guardian and a poll worker is telling you that you cannot exercise your right to vote because you have a guardian or because you have a developmental disability, you can call us and get real-time advice on what to do in that situation and how to work with your local poll workers to exercise your right to vote. Jen talked about this a little bit, but if you have a guardian, you can still vote. A court has to have a specific finding that you are incompetent for the purposes of voting, not just general incompetence, in order to remove your right to vote. If that happens, they are required to notify your Board of Elections within 30 days of the election. And if you have any questions about whether or not that has happened to you in a guardianship case, feel free to contact Disability Rights Ohio. That voting hotline number that is listed is also our intake number, and we do intakes 24 hours a day. You can leave a message and we'll get a call back and we can talk with you through these issues all the way leading up to election day. If you're working on your election plan and you're not sure how to navigate a specific issue, if you are somebody who's in a nursing home or if you are somebody who's in a psych facility, you can contact us and we can help set up whatever accommodations you would need in order to access voting. Next slide. There are obviously people who our hotline is English language. So I wanted to list other hotlines for people who need other accessibility, whether that is a foreign language as well as ASL and video call interpretation services. Next. If you have any questions, this is my contact information. I have also listed all of our disability rights contact information. We do intakes both through phone, website, as well as postal mail. It is a little bit slow, obviously, with the issues that are going on with the post office right now, but we do take them as well. So if you are somebody that only has access to postal mail, we can do that as well. Feel free to reach out to me individually. I do a lot of our election stuff at DRO, but you can also just do a general intake and we can get those questions that you have answered as soon as possible.
I want to just piggyback, Maggie, this was so good, but I want to point something out to everyone, which is that if you witness or experience a problem, it's really important to make sure you're calling, Maggie's organization, Disability Rights Ohio, or League of Women Voters, or the election protection hotlines, because even if you get it figured out, there's probably other voters who are experiencing that same thing. So we really want to know what your voting experience is so that we can be better advocates for all voters.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that we do. We talk with boards of elections as we're going into it. So if you are experiencing issues, I encourage you to contact us, even if you are able to get it resolved, like Jen said, so that we can address that as we work throughout the year on this information.
Great. Thank you both for this amazing information. And it is a lot of information. And if you're feeling like you're not able to write all those websites down, no worries. We will be sending you everybody who registered for this webinar will be getting a slide deck with this presentation. So you will have that information with you in your email box this week. So just wanted to let everybody know that I know this is very heavy on websites and phone numbers and organizations to call, but we got you covered. We will be sending this out to you this week. So we have about 10 more minutes left in our presentation. We want to open it up to questions and answers. So let's do that now. And Alice, do you have some questions for us from our?
It looks like we have one, and I'll go ahead and jump in, and if the Secretary of State wants to help. The question is, how are drop-off ballots monitored? So we have a drop box. There's one per county currently designated, so you should check your Board of Elections to see where that is. Some boards of elections, it's actually at their headquarters, and some counties, it's a different location. But those are monitored 24 hours with a video camera, and they're also bolted into the ground. And so what that means is that that's secure. So we can tell if there was some sort of security breach, and it would be very difficult for anyone to take those ballots out. I think this question might have been a little bit about who can drop off ballots, and that should be those immediate family members. And I'll hand that over to Brett to talk about that a little more.
Well, the other thing I was going to say about the drop boxes is those are emptied every day. You know, by a Democrat and a Republican, they go out together and get the ballots out of those each and every day. So, and I posted in the chat who's considered a family member, you know, for dropping those ballots off. So it can be a spouse, a domestic partner, mother, father, stepmother, stepfather, mother-in-law. The list goes, there's a pretty good list in the chat. So if you have any questions about who can drop off a ballot for you, that's in the chat.
So the next question is, who is able to work with the developmentally disabled community to help them get registered? So anyone can help someone to get registered. So that's actually a big thing that the League does. That's what we're usually doing. We're in festivals and events, all including hosted by our disability allies, getting folks registered. So anyone can do that. The biggest challenge, I think, goes back to getting to folks in the age of COVID-19. So keep in mind that you can register online. If you wanted to do a webinar specifically for people with developmental disabilities, that's something that the League and DRO have done many times and would be happy to do that. But also, if folks are in facilities, you may not be able to get into those. So that's a good just to reiterate, calling facilities in your community and seeing if they have voter registration forms, if they have absentee request forms, and if they don't, you know, offering just to drop those off, it would be a very helpful act.
I will also mention, so Disability Rights Ohio is doing outreach both to boards of developmental disabilities as well to facilities where people with developmental disabilities may be living. And that's something we do every year to reach out and encourage voter registration as well as voter participation. Another good resource is the Save Voter Project, which allows self-advocates, people with disabilities, to learn how to self-advocate and bring their community in and more involved in voting access as well. We also at DRO have specific publications that are easy read publications for people who do have either developmental or intellectual disabilities if people are interested. And if you contact me or DRO, we can help you get those information as well as any organization that serves people with disabilities is required to have voter registration forms on site so that people can access them when they go in for services.
Okay. Do we have any other questions in the chat box that we need to address, or can we open up to the audience to ask questions to our panelists. Jamie, are we able to open up the line so that audience members may ask a question?
It looks like there's a question in the chat currently,
Okay.
which is asking if the forms are written in language that a person with intellectual or developmental disabilities can understand. I assume you're asking about the registration and absentee request forms, and the answer to that is going to be no. Generally, they're going to be the standardized forms that all voters can access. However, if a person does have a disability, they are able to get somebody to help them understand the forms they need to be filled out. If somebody doesn't have access to assistance, they also can contact Disability Rights Ohio, and we can help people fill out the forms as well.
This is a really good question. Maybe Brett or Nate want to take. I think this is so common. And Sheila says, I have a stepdad currently in a nursing home. He tends to float between nursing home and hospital. What address should we use to register him to vote? And maybe add to that, you know, the absentee ballot process if they decide to request an absentee ballot, what they should do with that address.
I can start with the forms part, and then I'll leave it to Brett for the address and all that. Part of the reason, unfortunately, that forms have to be written and language has to be written in a certain way is because of, like, we have to do in a lot of cases what the legislature tells us to do. So if the legislature tells us to write something a certain way, that's the way we have to write it. And so that's part of why sometimes a lot of the forms and a lot of the, you know, how-tos on how to register to vote are written in such like legalese, is because it is based on what the legislature requires us to do. I'll turn it over to Brett to answer the question about the address situation and hospitalization of voters.
Yeah, I mean, the address, your registration address is the address you intend to return to. You know, so it's going to be, if that is the scenario, that'd be the nursing home address. You know, if you have a situation where you're unexpectedly hospitalized, there are some provisions in the revised code where you can get a ballot sent there, or, you know, depending on what the COVID-19, having an election official come out and bring that ballot. But just keep in mind that there are provisions that if your stepdad is unexpectedly hospitalized, you know, you can call your county board of elections and they'll be able to help you out with that. So.
Great questions, everybody. I did get a note from our tech person that we cannot have audio questions from the audience. It's only through the chat box that we can get your questions. So we have a few more minutes before our webinar is over. Does any of the panelists want to address anything that maybe or reiterate something important that we didn't get to? Okay. We have a lot of information that we provided you today. It's a lot of websites. Again, we will be providing you the slide deck for this presentation in your email. I want to thank all our presenters for your time and all the resources and information you provided. And not only today, but in the future. They are there to help be a resource, as well as the Center for Disability Empowerment. Feel free to call our office and we can help direct you to the organization would be most appropriate to get your question answered. I want to also give out, this is our information on who we are and where we're located. We are working remotely, but we do monitor our phone every day, and somebody's checking messages, and we will get back to you. We also have quite a presence on social media, so you can follow us on Facebook and other ways to get information on upcoming events. And I did want you to be aware of part 2, because this is such an important election and a lot of information. We're going to talk again on the 22nd of September. We're going to be talking about voters' rights, and again, how to make that election plan, where you can find information on candidates and issues, and also, again, ask questions on the election process. If you have specific questions you didn't get answered, please email myself, and I will be able to get those addressed, and we can put that into the presentation on the 22nd. So if you have specific questions you would like to ask the panelists, we can address those if you send those to me, and you'll have my email address in the slide deck. I also want to give a shout out to our tech people who are behind the scenes, made this possible. That's Jamie Lamar from the Center for Disability Empowerment, and Alice Pressler from the League of Women Voters. So thank you so much, the Secretary of State Office, Disability Rights Ohio, and our own CDE staff, the Center for Disability Empowerment staff, who really pulled together to make this webinar a success. And I really appreciate it. And most importantly, to the audience out there that tuned in and wanted to get information and resources on how to be an informed voter. So good luck out there, and remember to vote November 3rd.